Call the meeting to order. I do not believe we have any agenda changes. With that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. Clerk Emma.
Mr. Fiducia.
Here.
Mr. Gurl.
Present.
Mrs. Gorel.
Present.
Mr. Huffman.
Present.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. McDonald.
Present.
Mr. Neighbors.
Here.
Mrs. Red. Mr. Salgado.
Present.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. Tassani.
Present.
Mr. Webster.
Here.
Mr. Westcott.
Present.
Mr. Arena.
Here.
Mr. Billich.
Here.
Mr. Boomer.
Here.
Mr. Booker.
Present.
Mr. Butita.
Here.
Mrs. Crosby.
Here.
Mr. Fellers.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have 19 present and 1 absent.
Thank you very much, Clerk Emma. With that, I will turn things over to Mr. Fellers. Ask everybody to stand for the prayer and the pledge, please.
Born of our shared history, with high hopes for the days that lie ahead, we gather to craft the future we share with one another. We gather with faith in the practice of our democracy. We gather with hearts and minds open to the wisdom in every voice among us. In our gathering, we design and build our bold future. May we bring our best selves to this service. May we dream these dreams and do this work in solidarity. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Particularly good invocation. Before we start the evening with our first presentation, just want to review, since we have our second meeting of our new board. We will have one board member speak at a time. I'll give you the floor, acknowledge you, thank the chairman for giving you the floor. At the end, I will thank you for your comments, and we'll just go one at a time through our agenda this evening. Our first item of business is a presentation by our state's attorney, Marilyn Height-Ross, to talk about just a quick review on our board policy, on our conflict of interest policy. Thank you very much. We have to dim the lights.
Good evening. I just want to welcome you all back, thanking you all for your dedicated service to Winnebago County and wishing you a happy new year. What I plan to do tonight is just give you a brief overview of a couple of things: protocol for a special prosecutor, as well as the procedure for abstention. Time to time I will come before you to just do brief presentations to remind you of the rules, and I'm always available to meet with all of you if you have questions individually. So basically, pursuant to statute section 2-70, board members have the right to abstain from voting on any subject if they feel that there might be a conflict. Each member present shall vote on each question put to a vote unless excused from such vote. And one of the bases to be excused from the vote is if you believe you have a conflict. Under the same section, the chairman shall not vote except to break a tie. Board members shall be excused from a vote due to a conflict of interest as defined in section 50 ILCS 105/3. A conflict of interest to require abstention must involve a direct or personal financial interest in the issue being voted upon. Now, having said that, only you as board members can determine that issue. So if at any time you are faced with voting on a subject that you believe you might have a direct personal or financial interest in that matter, you should reach out to me. We will meet with you, we will discuss the matter, and if we believe that that conflict exists, I will draft a memorandum and I will send that to you. Sorry about that, next slide. After consultation with the board's legal counsel, the chairman should have the power to excuse a member from voting for a conflict of interest even though not prohibited. So that's the other basis where a board member may be excused from voting. The next short presentation deals with the protocol for a special prosecutor. Now, I've been in office a little over 30 days, and this issue has arisen, so I feel it prudent to advise all of you as to the protocol that I, as state's attorney, has put in place for the request for a special prosecutor. First of all, any request for a special prosecutor must be submitted in writing to me. That can come in the form of an email, come in the form of a letter if you don't do emails, but I must have a written request for that. What should that request include? Number one, it should include the nature of the conflict. So you must advise me why you believe a special prosecutor is necessary to represent your interests. Number two, you must include the scope of the representation for the special prosecutor. For example, specifically, what are you asking me to do as state's attorney in appointing a special prosecutor, and what do you anticipate that special prosecutor to do for you that I cannot because I have a conflict? So that has to be written, submitted in written form to me. When I receive the written request, Mr. Palinkas and I will meet and discuss whether or not we believe that a special prosecutor is warranted. And considering that issue, we have to determine whether or not there are antagonistic interests that require litigation in which the state's attorney's office, by virtue of a conflict, cannot represent both parties involved. So that would be the basis that I would use, the litmus test, to determine whether or not I believed a special prosecutor would be appropriate. Under no circumstances will I accept an oral request for a special prosecutor. My protocol is being implemented because once a special prosecutor is appointed, the county board is mandated to pay those fees. So I'm very cognizant of the budget and the finances of the county as a whole. So if a special prosecutor is warranted, I will appoint a special prosecutor. If it is not, then I won't. But once that special prosecutor is appointed, the court would enter an order requiring fees to be paid, and once that order is entered by the court, the county board would be mandated to cover the special prosecutor's fees. Okay, that concludes my brief presentation on those issues. If any of you want this emailed to you, I'm happy to do that. If you have additional questions, I'm happy to sit down with you individually to answer those. I certainly understand you have a lot of county business to take care of, but I did want to start the year off by presenting on a couple of issues that I see coming up quite often. And also, I am open to any issues that you might believe that you want me to present briefly on to the entire county board. I'm happy to take questions. I will limit the questions only because I'm very respectful of your time this evening. So, yes.
Thank you very much. I did see a couple hands up. Just a quick follow-up, and then I'll go to Mr. Webster and then Mr. Schultz. Regarding the payment of fees, if you could go back to your last slide, I do know we have one of our departments at the county, a separate department that has a separate prosecutor or separate counsel. And just to be clear about obligation of payment, just to make sure we're clear on that.
Okay, so what's your question?
The question is on the payment part, just making sure that the county board is in fact mandated to pay. That is not something that we have a choice on.
That's correct. The county board, once a special prosecutor is appointed, They have to submit an invoice, and that invoice is approved by the court, and the court will enter an order for the invoice to be paid, and then the county board is mandated to pay those fees.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Webster, I believe, had the first question.
Yes, thank you, and thank you to our newly minted state's attorney. Yeah, I do have a question to you. What is the difference, is there a difference between abstention versus recusal?
Well, there's a difference without there really being a difference. The abstention is specifically mentioned in the code, and it specifically directs you as to when you should abstain to avoid the appearance of impropriety or unethical conduct. Recusal is not specifically outlined as abstention, so that would be my response to you.
Okay, and then follow up, please.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so for example, I will use the committee I'm familiar with, the zoning committee, for example. So if one of the committee members has an issue with one of the items before us, and says, you know, I think I need to abstain from this. So now, if a person abstains from that, then they can't be part of the conversation at all, correct?
Okay, so are you saying that they would be mandated because they would meet those requirements, or are they using the term abstention when really it's, I'm not comfortable and I'm going to recuse myself? Because that would be the difference.
Okay, let me see how I can rephrase this. Let's say a committee member said to me, you know,
Well, maybe I can help you out, Mr. Schultz. Okay, so,
Mr. Webster.
I'm sorry, I'm learning names.
All right.
I know Mr. Schultz, I've known him for years, so sorry about that.
my twin brother.
Sometimes when I'm doing an orientation, for example, for grand jury members, and you know, the grand jury, they vote on indictments. So I use the recusal example such as this, you know, if we are presenting a case regarding sexual assault and you yourself have been sexually assaulted, or you have a close family member that has been sexually assaulted, and you're just not comfortable. You know, you feel you can be fair, but you're not comfortable. In that situation, you're not mandated to excuse yourself from the vote, but if you're uncomfortable, you can certainly recuse yourself. So the recusal is more of an option as opposed to under the abstention rule being mandated if certain things exist.
Okay, I guess the example I was going to use was, let's say somebody on my committee, and we have somebody coming in before us for a zoning change, map amendment, whatever, and the committee member says to me, I work for that company that wants to get this done, you know, so it would be proper for them to abstain. Now, what I'm asking there is, would that also be proper for them not to even take part in the conversation?
Oh, yes, I believe so. They should not participate at all. Yes.
That's what I'm asking.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Webster. Mr. Schultz.
I just want to confirm understanding of something. So in the event that a special prosecutor is appointed, we know that the court is going to rule that that bill has to be paid, right? So that happens, and a budget amendment is going to be necessary because at the beginning of a budget year, there isn't a line item in their budget for a special prosecutor, so they're going to have to bring that as a budget amendment. But I just want to verify that that doesn't require the board to give that entity, whichever department is involved, additional funds to cover that special prosecutor, meaning it's perfectly appropriate in a budget amendment to just have them absorb the expense of that special prosecutor by an offsetting reduction somewhere else in their budget.
Okay, so what I said was you're mandated to pay the bill, the invoice. I did not say that the court can mandate the board how they pay it, if that makes sense. So that's the board's decision, but it's legal advisor. If you are ordered to pay the invoice, you must pay that.
And the reason I asked the question that I did is because the way the implication of the way this was presented to us, what we're dealing with in the Finance Committee currently, was that we had to give additional funds in order to pay this bill. And maybe it was just me misunderstanding how it was presented, but I'm just going on record saying that that's how I heard and understood what was being presented. Thank you.
So with that, well, let me just, if I could just add, without going into any specific situation, I'm telling you and advising the board of what the procedure is. But I'm not telling the board how to do your business. I'm just telling you that if you are ordered to pay an invoice for a special prosecutor by the judge, you are mandated to pay that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question, and this has to do or relate with Mr. Schultz's comment, and with all due respect to him, would we not be setting ourselves up for a possible litigation like we saw with the chief judge if we go in there and reduce their budget by that amount? Would that be a direct violation, or would that?
Well, again, we're talking two separate things. What I'm telling you is that if you're mandated to pay an invoice, you have to pay it.
Right.
What I am not telling you is that the judge can mandate you how you set a budget, for example, for a different elected official, and how you handle budget amendments. That's outside the purview of the court. So the court's order is you must pay the invoice, for example. How you as a board determine that you are going to pay that, it's up to the county board is what I'm saying.
Excellent. And if I could, Chairman, just a quick follow-up and just a comment. I think it would behoove us just to pay that money and not reduce the budget by a line item, or to take that money away from that department as some sort of a penalty. It kind of sounds like you would be paying them out of the general fund, then reducing their budget, and they would have to either make some sacrifice or a layoff or some procedural cut to actually make that budget work. So that's my, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gurl. Mr. Schultz had his hand up first, but I'm going to go to Mr. McDonald for the first time, and then Mr. Schultz for a second. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If the judge directed the funds to be paid out of the general fund, do we have any other option other than to pay them from the general fund?
You do not, if the order is that specific, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Schultz on a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because we're showing respect, in all due respect to Mr. Gurl, I was not asking that we reduce anybody's budget. In fact, we don't do that. We don't reduce budgets after the fact. All we do is add the budget. So I would not suggest that we would reduce the budget by that amount. However, I will also go on record as saying I want there to be accountability on the part of individual leaders who choose to bring an additional expense onto this county by requiring that a special prosecutor be appointed. And I think it's appropriate that there be accountability for that decision. It's significant.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz on a follow-up. Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to be clear, you said the court cannot specify that the money be paid from the general fund?
No, the question was asked, if the court order specifically said, pay the money from the general fund, that would be the scope of the order and that would have to be carried out. I was speaking in general terms because I was not speaking to any particular situation.
So it's,
Okay.
it's within the court's discretion to determine where the money comes from?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it's also within the court's discretion to enlarge the scope of representation as well. When a special prosecutor is appointed, if ancillary or collateral issues arise, the court can, in its discretion, enlarge the scope of representation.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Arena. Carla, you wanted to add something.
I just wanted to clarify something because I think there's confusion. The general fund, the sheriff has his departmental budget in the general fund. There's a lot of departments that have their budget in the general fund. So to say that it's paid from the general fund, that doesn't distinguish that it can't be from that departmental budget. However, the budget amendment we're proposing would come out of the administrative budget, not the sheriff's budget. But the sheriff's budget is in the general fund.
And we will probably have a question or two on a follow-up when we get to that action item. Thank you for that piece. Anything you'd like to add?
No, just thank you. And again, if anyone wants the presentation in email format, if you could email me, I'd be happy to send it to you and also present on any topics that you would like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time and help. Next item of business, I do not believe we have any public comment this evening, so we'll move on to meeting minutes. May I please have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from November 20th and December 3rd of 2018, and to lay over the minutes from December 13th of 2018. I got a motion by Mr. Fellers, a second by Mr. Boomer. The minutes are before the board. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item of business, announcements and communications. Clerk Gilman.
Mr. Chairman, all items listed below were received as correspondence.
And we will place those on file. Thank you very much. Next item of business, board member.
Can we identify Mrs. Red was not here for the roll call, but she is currently here?
Yes, we'll acknowledge Mrs. Red has joined us. Thank you for joining us, Mrs. Red. Happy New Year. And next item of business, board member correspondence. Any board member comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the chairman's report. I'll be very brief. I emailed out just a list of a variety of things that are being talked about, and they're at different stages. I'm going to be reaching out to board members to see if you'd like to sit and chat just about 2019, any ideas, questions, thoughts, concerns you have, as well as anything on that list that you want to talk about in a little more detail. We'll go from there on that, but we'll be following up in the very near future. There's also going to be a discussion based on the strategic planning process around shared values and the discussion around the strategic plan. We did want to wait till the new board got in so we could have that discussion with the new group, and we'll be having that in early 19. Lastly, around events, I believe the date is March 21st is the State of the County with the Chamber of Commerce over the lunch hour. We will get that date and time out, and we do invite board members to that, and be happy to discuss that with you in advance as well. Next item of business, County Administrator Report. Carla, do you have anything to add?
I do. Thank you, Chairman. I just want to let everybody know I'll be out of the office from the 16th to the 22nd, in case you're trying to reach me. We received proposals for the Public Safety Building Project Manager RFQ, and our evaluation committee met for the first time. We plan to all review the proposals, narrow it down to 3 or 4 top candidates, and then conduct interviews with those candidates. Each of you should have received an invitation to tour the public safety building. I think we provided 3 different dates. I think it would be good for all of you to go through the building as we go through this process and give you a better understanding of what you might be voting on. At the request of Mr. Girl, we met with Leopardo. They have a program that creates utility and operating cost savings that can be guaranteed by them, and then those savings are used to fund some capital needs. So we're participating in a feasibility study that they'll provide at no charge. They had a request for information that we provided to them, so I'll keep you updated as that process continues. And then the 911 working group, we had originally planned to meet Tuesday and then again on the 15th. That's been delayed. The participants want to have a little bit more time to look at the IGA. I had informed them that I'd be out of the office on the 22nd, which would be the next normal meeting, so we're hoping we can get a different date scheduled for that process. And then I had sent out an email to all of you that you need to register at resetwincoil.us for your county email accounts. We're going to make the passwords more complex in order to protect us from outside parties trying to get into our network. If you do not register by the 15th, you'll be locked out of your email account and you'll have to contact Gus and his department in order to get back in. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kim Ponder, our HR director. She's going to preview some of the commercials that are going to be coming out related to our geofencing for the nursing home.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to go through this very quickly. We have talked about this. You approved funding for this program, so I just want to show you where we're at. We are at kickoff, so I want to roll through this with you. Again, I'll show our first commercial. This is our recruitment commercial that we'll be airing.
I've worked at River Bluff Nursing Home for 8 years.
I like working here because I feel it is a home-like environment and it's truly person-centered care that our patients have a choice in their life.
The healthcare benefits is great. If I need to go to the wellness center, that's a great option to use for your family and as well as yourself.
We have the best insurance package, the best retirement package, and the best vacation times, top of the line.
So that is one of our shorter versions that you'll see. This that you see here are what are called banner ads. So as you recall, my previous conversations about this is when you clear a geofence. So we have it set up that we have 2 initial employment geofences set for River Bluff specifically. One is the Rock Valley College OSF School of Medicine that they have out there, their nursing program. So that physical building for all of their medical arts has been geofenced and starting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Anyone that takes their phone, their laptop, their pad through that geofence and breaks that geofence is going to hit with one of these banners will pop up on their electronic device. Okay. Then what will happen is in 24 hours, if they didn't act on this in 24 hours, it's going to pop up again. And then again, 24 hours after that, it will pop up again. So it will go through this process and they will get 3 hits for interest in being employed at River Bluff. They can act, you see in the bold letter there, click to apply. If you click to apply to that, that moves right to our Winnebago County landing site with all of our employment offerings there, and that will take them right straight through to being able to apply online for our positions that we have here at Winnebago County. The next thing I'm going to show for you, this is the commercial that you will see aired on WTVO, is the channel that we'll see these on. And this is for resident recruitment. So this is in order for us to try to improve our number of residents that we currently have at River Bluff.
I've been a resident here for over 20 years. I would really recommend River Bluff as far as taking care of your loved ones.
I can't say enough about the care I get for the nurses. They're right there when I need help. I give out more hugs and kisses to the girls because they're always so nice to me.
It's easy to get attached to them because they're helping us in so many different ways. They really try to be like family. It's really a nice place.
So you'll also find on your desk, I have laid the schedule for January and February of when these ads will run. So they will offset each other. So the first one runs and then the opposite one runs on the next scheduled time. So please feel free to watch for those. Also, we have set up what's called retargeting. So we have set up a system that we have given them a list of words that people will Google. So some people think it's a little bit creepy, but they Google a word. So if you go in your search bar and you ask for a certain word, we've given them a list of words. And if they hit one of those search words, they will automatically get a retargeted, and these are the retargeted banner ads that they will get for patient care at River Bluff. Okay?
That's it. Thank you
And
very
this
much.
is starting, the banner ads start tomorrow morning, and you can see that the commercials begin on Monday.
Thank you for your work on that, and thank you to the board for supporting this. I know we talked about this a few months ago in Operations Committee. Appreciate your support on that. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify here, the banner ads is part of the geofencing program. This is not an invasive ad on their phone or their tablet device. It's if they hit one of our advertising partners, being mystateline.com or any of those websites, those different websites or partners that we have, or...
No, this will hit their phone. If they clear the geofence, it will tag their phone.
You'll tag their phone, but they'll be served the ad through a typical web page, not through...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so this is a service that we've contracted with WTVO.
Sure, okay, so it's WTVO's network.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Again, thank you very much for your work on this.
Thank you.
The next item of business is the approval of the consent agenda. May I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the raffle report? May I please have a motion? Mrs. Gorel on the motion, Mr. Hoffman on the second. Thank you. Item is now before the board. Any discussion on the raffle report related to the consent agenda here this evening? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business, standing committee reports. First item is our Finance Committee. We'll bring up Mr. Salgado. A handful of resolutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, the the first item that's on there is number 2, Budget Amendment 2019-013, Sheriff Attorney Fees. I'd like to motion that, and can I get a second?
Yes, sir. We have a motion by Mr. Salgado on Budget Amendment 2019-013, the Sheriff's Attorney Fees, second by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Girl. Item is now before the board for discussion. Any questions or comments on this item? Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just ask if we can just have a little clarification on exactly what the fees are related to, if possible.
Yes, I'm going to look to either Mr. Kurlinkis, Carla, or regarding an overview of the attorney's fees. Who would like to speak to that? I'll defer to anybody over here.
Okay.
Carla, you want to kick it off?
Thank you, Chairman. We received, I think Mr. Kalinkis' office received a court order to pay the attorney fees for the sheriff's attorney. We decided to put it in the administrative budget because we don't really care to add attorney fee line items to individual departmental budgets. And we do need to pay it from the general fund.
And a follow-up to that, I believe in the item in your packet lists out the legal line by line of what we were charged for, as any legal bill would include, but that is, of course, in the packet. Is there anything else we'd like to add just in the general overview? Or we're good here, Mr. Kurlinkis? Okay, we're good. Mr. Girl, want to follow up, then Mrs. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. As some board members have seen, we don't have this in our packet in front of us. I know it's probably on the phone or through an email. Can we just have a brief description on why it was needed and the reasoning for it?
The process that got us here for a department head to have outside counsel, I think is where you're going. Could I go to Mr. Kurlinkis or somebody for an overview of how we came to be here? And I'm sorry if I'm missing somebody.
Is it on now?
There we go.
Okay. I'm going to defer to Mr. Kurlinkis. This was a matter that was prior to my tenure, and so Mr. Kurlinkis is best to advise you. Thanks.
Right. The decision to, the actual petition to recuse the state's attorney was filed at the direction of then State's Attorney Gilbert Scott. He determined that there was a conflict since the Sheriff's Department had sent him a letter indicating they wished to consult legal counsel about the possibility of initiating a lawsuit against the county board, I believe on the 2018 budget initially. I think that's what the original appointment was for. The petition was granted by Judge Fabiano, who then signed the order mandating that the attorney's fees be paid by the county from the general fund. That's part of the order. So that was, as State's Attorney Heike Ross indicated, that was long before her involvement in this. Since that time, the appointment has been expanded, and we've discussed this quite a bit, and that was one of the reasons for her presentation tonight, so everybody understood what the new protocol was for this. Since the initial petition was granted, the council, Mr. Eckel, who represents the Sheriff's Department in this matter, has come in and gotten 2 expansions of the representation. One involving representing the sheriff on anything having to do with the 911 center, and the other one to include the giving him advice about possibly suing the county on behalf of the 2019 budget. Those were both individual orders that were granted by Judge Fabiano. So the scope of the representation for the special prosecutor appointed to represent the sheriff in this now, it covers all 911 issues, and then also any issues on the 2019 budget. So that's where we are now.
Thank you, Mr. Kurlinkis. I believe I had Mrs. Gorel, then Mr. Fellers. Mrs. Gorel.
I would like to have it a matter of public record. How much are we paying the attorney?
It's $27,791.
And this is only for the first time?
That is correct. Going back until last year, I believe. Yes.
So now he will have free range anytime he wants to challenge us on his budget, because he now has an attorney, and he will be able to call.
I'll look to Mr. Kurlinkis just on scope and time frame, if there's an anticipated time frame related to this engagement that's been identified, if at all.
There is no time frame that's been imposed by the court on this, and as I said, Mr. Eckel has come in on 2 separate occasions to expand the appointment. The initial appointment was only limited to the 2018 budget year, to advise the sheriff on issues regarding the 2018 budget year. Obviously, when the 2019 budget year came in, Mr. Eckel came in and sought an order expanding that to the 2019 budget year. Also, if you'll recall, we spent quite a bit of time before the county board discussing what was going to happen with the 911 center. It was at that time that Mr. Eckel came in and petitioned Judge Fabiano to expand it so that he could advise the sheriff on all issues relating to the 911 center.
So does this fee cover all of this, or is it only the first part of the 2018 budget?
I'm not sure what it goes through. Maybe Mr. Salgado has what the, I don't have the invoice in front of me, but this is the first invoice that we've received from this law firm regarding the representation.
That is correct. I believe is up to December 13th of 2018 when this was presented at the board, at court, December 7th actually. So this is just up to that point, going all the way to 2017 October, I believe. So this is just part of it. I don't know if there's going to be any additional coming down the pipeline. Obviously, I would assume if they're seeking legal counsel, continuing to do so, I would expect another invoice coming through, potentially in the near future down the road.
Yes. Mrs. Hegeross.
I'd just like to add that any special prosecutor submitting an invoice to the court has to provide an itemized list of hours worked, and then that has to be approved by the court, and that's how the court comes up with the idea of signing the order. I would also like to indicate initially that former State's Attorney, Ms. Bruscato, did seek assistance from other State's Attorney's offices who declined to come in as a special prosecutor. He also sought the assistance of the Illinois Attorney General, the Illinois Appellate Prosecutors Association, State's Attorneys from Boone County, Ogle County, DeKalb County, and Stevenson County, who declined to come in and serve as special prosecutor.
Mr. Chairman, I have the invoice here in front of me. It looks like the billable hours started in October 18th of 2017, and it looks like it concluded up until October 31st of 2018. So those are the billable hours for this invoice. So I'm assuming if there's any further meetings talking about litigation potentially or advice on that, I would expect additional invoices to be incurred.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. A follow-up, Mrs. Gorel, then Mr.
So that means the public really needs to know that what the sheriff is costing us in attorney's fees, because he cannot go by the guidelines that every other department has to go through when it comes to budget. And if this is going to be continued, it sounds like it will be continued from year to year as long as he's in office. And it's a shame that our taxpayers are going to be laying out this kind of money so he can have his personal attorney come in and disrupt what we have going for budgets, and that's all we can afford. It's, to me, it's a bit selfish, but thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few questions here. Number one, at the point of filing the petition and the order where it was to be paid out of the general fund, is there an opportunity for the state's attorney to challenge that petition or challenge where the fund that is used for those monies?
Mr. Kurlinkus.
Once the petition was granted, the state's attorney no longer represents the county in this matter.
Well, but someone needs to represent us.
Yes.
Who represents us?
If you want to challenge what you're talking about challenging, you would have to engage the services of outside counsel.
So just to clear that up, if we feel that we are being taken advantage of, we cannot use the state's attorney's office, we would then have to hire our own attorneys to challenge the petition, both for whether for funding, or I would say like even right now, where if we think the sheriff may have overstood the need for this, we could then challenge the petition for continuance on this so that we could end this and we could stop incurring bills, but we would have to hire our own outside counsel or request the assistance of another state's attorney. The list that you mentioned before with Joe and Mr. Riscado attended the contest.
State's Attorney Hyde Ross mentioned, yes. To answer your question in a nutshell, the petition itself was simply the recusal of the Winnebago County State's Attorney from representing the sheriff on the specific, very narrow matter of the 2018 budget. That's what the petition came in.
Sure. I guess what I want to be clear, and I'm looking through this now, but at some point an order was made for us to make a payment to pay these lawyers' fees, right. And it was specifically made to come out of the general fund.
That's correct.
As opposed to the 1% public safety sales tax fund or any of the other funds that are out there. I can say for myself, and I'm sure for the board members, it might have been a time when we'd have liked to know that we could have made a challenge to that, right? That we could have challenged that order, because frankly, this shouldn't be coming out of the general fund, it should be coming out of the public safety tax fund, or wherever it comes out of, right? But we should have to at least know that we can make a challenge to this at some point, or if he's going to maintain legal counsel indefinitely, I would think that this board would want to challenge that as well. How do we challenge that?
Mr. Kurlinkus.
Again, if you were going to challenge, let's suppose, and State's Attorney Hyde Ross indicated that it's required that the invoice have specific billing statements on that. If you were to challenge that, if you were going to challenge that in front of the court, you would have to have representation. You'd have to have legal counsel. The State's Attorney's Office is recused from this particular matter. So it cannot be the Winnebago County State's Attorney's Office that would represent the county board in challenging any of these invoices.
I'm not saying challenging the invoices. What I want to challenge is the ability to generate more hours, more billable hours from this outside counsel. At what point can we challenge the existence of a special prosecutor?
Go ahead.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to confer with Mr. Kurlinkus because, again, that was prior to my tenure. My understanding is because the State Attorney's Office agreed to this procedure, that would cause us to not be able to challenge the petition now, because we agreed to the special prosecutor.
How do we challenge the ongoing existence of a special prosecutor?
Mr. Kalinkas?
Excuse me. I believe that again would require a filing before the court. I can tell you that when the first expansion came up on this to expand the representation to the 911 matters, that we did appear because we felt that that was outside of the scope of the first petition, which had already been granted, the one about the budgetary issues. We argued before Judge Fabiano that should require another petition. And she ruled against us and indicated that she was going to allow the expansion under the existing petition. So to answer your question, you would have to file a motion in the court seeking to bring this back, bring this back into a narrower representation, or try to indicate to the court or argue before the court that there should be some type of end to the representation. Like I said, I don't know, you know, I can only speculate on what the future would bring on this, but we did see the second expansion of the petition went from the 2018 budget year to the 2019 budget year, which is where we are now. I don't know if that will continue or not.
That would be 3 expansions though, because it was the original 2018 budget, then it was the 911 center, and then it was the 2019 budget.
Well, it's two expansions to the original one. The original one was 2018.
Okay, fine, you're right. Okay.
Thank you. And I know there's a couple more hands. What I would say, we will take these questions for sure. We want to make sure, now that we've kind of given the overview of where we're at, make sure we're on the same page. Any future discussion of things we may or may not want to consider to do, my understanding is we could go into closed session to talk about future potential, anything related to litigation. For obvious reasons, that wouldn't be something we'd want to talk about on the board floor. And I apologize if I go out of order. I had Mrs. Gorel and Mr. Schultz. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. I do think it needs to be discussed openly. It needs to be a matter of record of what we were going through. Second, if we as a board do get an outside attorney to represent us, where do we get the money? I'm sure all of us on this board cannot afford 20 grand just out of our pockets, just like that. Yeah. Where do we get the money?
Yes, Mrs. Gorel, that's a very good question. As it was with the courts, that was covered from the general, that was covered through our budget, and we just ran through a budget amendment. When we spent the 50 grand on the courts lawsuit from our side, that was covered as a budget amendment. In Carl, I believe through the general fund, is that correct?
It's through the general fund.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. One is the summary write-up on this in the packet that we received. It's the first document related to this budget amendment. I believe it has a mistake because it says that the revenue source is PSST, presumably the public safety tax. And then later on, the next thing that's presented says that it's coming from the general fund. The order also says that it's coming from the general fund. But my point beyond that, just correction, is that I don't see a rationale for the sheriff not to continue this exercise. He's already shown that he's willing to go for an expansion of the attorney's, the things that the attorney is covering. And I don't anticipate that he wouldn't be open to adding other new things where he would like to get some additional input. And it appears as though the judge is fine with that and going to likely grant whatever additional extensions that might be requested. Maybe that's an overstatement on my part, but You already, as state's attorney representing us, attempted in the 911 expansion to stop that. I'm hoping that you also tried to stop the expansion into the 2019 budget cycle as well. All this to say that I understand we have to pay the bill, but I'm not going to have it come out of general fund. I'm going to suggest that there be accountability and that the sheriff find the money. Right now, there's no accountability. You could ask him to do 12 additional things and have zero accountability for that decision, because it will simply come out of some other pot. It costs him nothing, literally, to make that decision. And so I am going to be opposed to this, not blindly misunderstanding that we have to pay the bill. We have to pay the bill. But I don't believe we should just give in the way I perceive us to be handling this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. I'm going to go to Mr. Arena first time and then Mr. Fellers on a follow-up. Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is the state's attorney's office able to reach out to other state's attorneys for assistance to petition the court to get some, like an end date to this and maybe narrow the scope? Are you able to do that for us at this time? Or we have to do that on our own?
Mr. Kurlinkus.
As State's Attorney Height Ross indicated, that and for the representation of the initial appointment of special prosecutor on this, other State's Attorney's offices were approached. I can't tell you what their response would be at this point, but as a practical matter, State's Attorney's offices are in the same situation our State's Attorney's offices are. We're pretty busy doing the business of the people of Winnebago County. So expecting another State's Attorney's office to say, well, we'll spare a prosecutor, a member of their civil bureau, whoever would be assigned to come in, I'm not sure how likely that would be. But getting back to your initial question on that, at some point, somebody's going to have to sit down and look at this and see what you're asking the county board to do, which is either narrow this or whatever you want to do, to see what the procedures would be like to try to get that relief from the court. That's what you're asking. And your secondary question was, could you get another state's attorney's office to do it? You certainly ask. There's nothing to prohibit you from asking that at all.
But again, it sounds to me like you feel it's unlikely that they would agree. But that's not the best.
I would defer to the state's attorney on that, but that would be speculation. I really don't know what the likelihood would be.
Right. So right now, this situation's wide open, right? We're not represented, and this attorney can bill us.
In this particular matter, for the scope of the 2019 budget and the 911 center representing the sheriff, you are not represented by the Winnebago County State's Attorney's Office because of the petition for recusal.
And will continue to be billed. We should expect to continue to receive bills, right?
I have no way to know that.
At this time, I would just say it's very logical that my understanding is that is in process. I'm not aware of it not continuing. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 quick points. Mr. Schultz, I'd say we should be very careful what we ask of the sheriff. Otherwise, he will consult legal counsel, and we will continue to be invoiced for this. And might also say, I believe this state's attorney's office lent Attorney Ross to Cook County. Maybe they could return the favor.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers. I believe I saw Mr. Webster's hand up. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I think a lot of us thought this was going to be a quick meeting tonight, but I'm noticing that Mr. Kalinkas took Mr. Schultz's advice from the last meeting. He brought a chair. So, at any rate, I think I agree with what Angie has just said, that we should be dealing with this in open session. We should be dealing this in front of the public, doing the public's work, because as hard as it is for us to get a grasp on this, you can imagine, what does it look like from the outside when we are paying an attorney to have the sheriff sue us? We're paying an attorney to counsel an elected official on suing the other elected officials. And in anybody else's world, this would make absolutely no sense whatsoever. And I understand, like Mr. Schultz said, that we're duty bound, that we have been ordered to pay this, whatever, but it absolutely makes zero sense to me. And I mean, how would it be able to be if a Joe Public wanted to sue the county board, and Joe Public went to the same judge and said, hey, you okayed the county board having to pay for an attorney to represent the sheriff, you're going to pay for one to represent me too when I sue that same county board?
Thank you, Mr. Webster. I think I saw one more hand up, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I've asked the state's attorneys there, I don't know what your involvement was in court there, but I was just wondering, was there any audit done, so to speak, with the billing? I mean, were some of the charges incurred with the extensions? Were the attorney fees incurred before the extension was granted? Did anybody look it over and say, hey, this timeline fits and it was appropriate? And, and another thing, just curious what the hourly rate was. And I would just say to this board, I mean, as frivolous as it sounds, I mean, I would lean towards us getting our own counsel, private counsel, seeing in the wake that we have through the state's attorney's office.
Thank you. We got two questions. The first is on the review of the itemized invoice. I'll look to Mr. Kurlinkus regarding review, and then Mr. Salgado on the hourly rate.
When we received the, thank you, Chairman. When we received the email from council representing the sheriffs, I sent that on to the administration for handling on that. No, we didn't do any. We didn't undertake any review of whether it fell within the scope, simply because we were prohibited from challenging that. Because, yeah, I understand, and I understand Mr. Webster's frustrations about trying to figure this out, but we're not in a position where we could go in and challenge those again, because we're recused from representing the county in that matter. It's a difficult concept to understand.
Carla, anything you want to add?
I did review it. I think the dates coincide with the time when the special prosecutor was appointed. I did question some of the items that were being charged for and sent an email to the chairman and Mr. Kurlinkus. However, I think since the court decided that they were appropriate and decided we have to pay the bill, I don't see any way out of it.
Thank you, Carla. Mr. Salgado.
Yes, according to the document here that I have in the exhibits, looks like it was $385 the hourly rate, but then they lowered it to $225 an hour. That's their going rate. I believe at the end they gave a 20% discount. Originally, I believe it was around the range of $34,738. They took an additional 20% reduction, dropping it down to $27,781.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Mr. Tassoni on a follow-up.
Thank you for that. Sounds like we got a deal.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Any other questions or comments by board members? Mr. Billick, did you? No, you're fine. Third time, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you. Last time, Mr. Chairman, I have just one request from administration. With these letters coming in, I think that these need to go to committee as soon as they do come in, whether it's the Public Safety Committee in a meeting, the Budget Committee, rather than just an email going around, so they can be discussed real time, so that action can be taken, so that this board can decide if we want to take action at the moment it's happening, not down the road. It's for this board to decide whether to take action, and we didn't know in committee when these happen right away. I would like to expand on that also, since we then jump back to the discussion of the public safety building. I'd also like to request that part of that interview process be done in committee as well, in front of board members, so that we are a part of this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just if
Yes,
I
sir.
could follow up for the last thing. Recently, before the Christmas holiday, Mr. Booker and myself met with the sheriff. We did ask the question about legal counsel. I just want to go for the record, Mr. Carter was present. We did talk about the future of litigation, potentially using the current attorney, and so there was discussions. You know, there's an understanding from his perspective, you know, that it's costing money to the county taxpayers as well, and our budget in general. So there's an understanding. I'm hopeful that, you know, down the road, then they can desist the order that's currently in place, and eliminating legal counsel. But that's my hope. I don't know. Those were the conversations. Mr. Booker was there. We had fruitful conversations on that. So just want to go on the record for that, and more to come on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado. Thank you, Mr. Fellers. Any other discussion by board members? Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Salgado, for clearing that up and adding on to that. I think as we move forward, we're going to continue to have promising discussions. And again, in my committee reports, matter of fact, we've got a combined finance public safety meeting coming up January 23rd for further discussion on this. And again, I will also report during my committee reports that the housing of federal inmates and revenue from bond out fees totals more than $1 million a year coming into the general fund. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Booker. Any other discussion, questions by board members? Seeing none, the item before the board is the budget amendment 2019-013, the sheriff's attorney's fees. And I will go ahead and ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Mr. Gurl?
Yes.
Mrs. Gurl?
No.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes, because we have to.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors?
Yes.
Mrs. Red?
Yes.
Mr. Salgado?
Yes.
Mr. Schultz? Mr. Tassani?
No.
Mr. Webster?
No.
Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Arena?
Yes.
Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer?
No.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Butita?
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Fellers?
No.
Mr. Fiducia?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that's 14 yeas, 6 noes.
Motion passes. A budget amendment requires 14 votes, a supermajority of the board. 14 votes is a supermajority of the board. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Salgado.
Yes, I will try to be brief now, moving forward. I would like to combine items 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, the workman's comp. These came out of committee unanimously voted, so I'd like to motion all of them and be voted at the same time.
So we got a motion by Mr. Salgado on items 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, but not number 9.
Correct.
I got a second by Mr. McDonald and Mr. Billick and Mr. Boomer. Item is now before the board, and that's the package of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. The items related to the settlement of litigation. Any questions or comments by board members? Mr. Gurl.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify, do we have to read these in individually just for the record for settlements?
We probably do it, since it's requested, we probably could go ahead and I'll ask Mr. Salgado to just read them in, and then we will take them up as a package.
Yeah, I don't mind voting on all of them together.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the first one is a resolution authorizing settlement of claim against the county of Winnebago entitled Fred Jones versus Winnebago County in the amount of $17,945.32. The second one is a resolution authorizing settlement of claim against the County of Winnebago entitled James Arrigo versus Winnebago County in the amount of $32,000. The next one is a resolution authorizing settlement of claim against the Winnebago County entitled Jared Smith versus the Winnebago County in the amount of $20,321.75. The next one is a resolution authorizing settlement of claim against the Winnebago County entitled Catherine White versus Winnebago County in the amount of $10,767.90. The next one is a resolution authorizing settlement of claim against the County of Winnebago entitled Stephanie Owens versus Winnebago County in the amount of $22,137.50. And finally, the last one is a resolution authorizing settlement of claim against the County of Winnebago entitled William James versus Winnebago County in the amount of $49,030.14.
Thank you. That package of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 is before the board. Any discussion on those items? Thank you for reading them in, Mr. Salgado. For the record, I see no hands up. Since these are resolutions, we can do this on a voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously, 3 through 8. Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado.
Yes, our last item is an ordinance amending sections of Chapter 2 of the County Code of Ordinance, the financial policy, and I move for that.
We got a motion by Mr. Salgado on item 9, an ordinance amending sections.
Read this, point of order, read to suspend.
I stand corrected. We have, is that a motion to suspend, Mr. Salgado?
Yes, I move to suspend the rules.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fellers, for correcting me. We have a motion to suspend the rules, which is a separate action. That would then separately allow us to vote this evening. Got a motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Salgado, second by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Boomer. The motion to suspend is now before the board. Any questions? All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We've suspended the rules. Mr. Salgado will make a motion to approve.
Yes, sir. And I would like to move an ordinance amending sections of Chapter 2 of the County Code of Ordinance, financial policy, to be voted on.
Okay, thank you very much. So we got a motion by Mr. Salgado on item 9, the ordinance amending sections of Chapter 2 of the County Code of Ordinances, the financial policy. I got a second again by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Boomer. Thank you. Item is now before the board. Any discussion on this item?
Yes, I just would like maybe Carla, if you could clarify that this is really in line with our CAFR, so financial policy.
Yeah, we're adopting this policy outlining how we prepare our financial statements, the policies that we're using. There was really only one change, and that's our revenue recognition. Previously, we would only recognize as revenue item receipts that were received within 90 days after our fiscal year end. That was causing some problems because of the delays in some of the payments from the state between how we're budgeting and how we're accounting for our receipts. So we're now proposing that if it's received within a year after our fiscal year end, that we recognize it as revenue in that current fiscal year.
Thank you very much, Carla. Any questions by board members on this item? Seeing none, are there any board members who are opposed to this item? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present, and motion passes unanimously. Mr. Salgado.
Yes, as Mr. Booker has relayed before, we're looking to hold a joint public safety and finance where the sheriff will present some of the financials and some of the detailed information based on a quarterly basis. Right now, tentatively, we said to the 23rd, but I believe Mr. Carter, I talked to him earlier, saying that maybe he wants to push it out because they got a couple things going on. So we'll have those discussions internally, but it's going to come. Thank you. That's all I got.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Next item of business, Personnel and Policy Committee, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Personnel and Policies Committee has one ordinance tonight. That ordinance is an ordinance amending sections of Chapter 2 of the County Code of Ordinances, and I'd like to put this in for first reading.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia.
Next item is the animal services. We had 620 calls for services. They took 113 dogs, 84 cats, 2 guinea pigs, 3 parakeets, and numerous wildlife. We adopted out 65 dogs, get this, 118 cats, 1 rabbit, and 2 guinea pigs. We're doing really great there. No pot-bellied pigs, Mr. Huffman, I'm sorry. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia. Next item of business, zoning committee, Mr. Webster.
Okay, thank you. Your zoning committee tonight has 4 items all in for a first reading for the layover. Number 1, SU 0518, special use with conditions. Number 2 is Z1718, map amendment. Number 3 is Z1818, map amendment. And number 4 is Z2018, also a map amendment. All for first reading for layover. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Next item of business, Economic Development Committee, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. I have no report, but we will be having a Monday meeting this coming Monday for the Economic Development Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Next item of business, Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Operations Committee's got one resolution for us tonight. It's for establishing a personal cell phone reimbursement amount for 2019, and I move for its adoption.
We got a motion by Mr. McDonald on the resolution establishing a personal cell phone policy reimbursement amount for 2019. May I have a second, please? Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Boomer, Mr. Billick, and Mr. Gurl. Item is now before the board. Any discussion on the cell phone reimbursement amount for 2019? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. McDonald.
That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next item of business, Public Works Committee. Mr. Kelly.
No, just
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize. Let me back this up. We've changed hats. Mr. Tassoni.
We have no report, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Old habits die hard. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. My apologies, Mr. Kelly. Next item of business, Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No report.
Thank you very much. One quick thing under unfinished business. Just want to make sure the request by Mr. Fellers is that if we get legal bills, that they are immediately sent out to the board so that you have, that's a copy, and then it would go to the Finance Committee since it's a financial matter. I think just so we're clear leaving here and we don't have anything where there's this set of expectations. Are we clear on that? Are we okay with that, everybody? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To clarify, I just want, whether it's when the bill comes or whether we know that there's going to be an action taken by a department that's going to incur a cost or could require a immediate response by the board, right? So, you know, I feel like we might have missed out an opportunity to have challenged something here or at least been a part of it at that moment, or potentially directed the chairman to hire outside attorney to challenge this, right? I mean, it might only be a couple hours worth of work instead of, however many the sheriff incurred. We need to know that right away so we can make action on it right away.
Yes. I know when the initial discussion happened back in several months back, that was a discussion item, but I think that's a good process and we have a committee for it to go through going forward. Yes, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yeah, I just would reiterate that, based on what we've gone through in the past with the court systems and as of lately with the sheriff, maybe it's a good idea that we put some money aside to keep someone on retainer, so at least we have private counsel for when the need arises and they're a phone call away. I think it'd be money well spent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tassoni. Any other unfinished business? Mr. Webster.
Yeah, not sure if this is unfinished or new. On this handout that we have all on our desk, the projected host fee commitment multi-year contracts. And the next to the last 2 columns, there's Project U, not approved by the board. It says yet to be determined for $500,000. And the next column is Project EW, not approved, to be determined for $150,000. Can I get a little insight on what these two things are?
The two items that are there are, again, not approved by the board. Money has not been spent. There are just set-asides on discussions that may very well be coming to the Economic Development Committee in the very near future. These are things that are in the pipeline that are not come to fruition. In the one case with the one project, I talked with Mr. Westcott, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to have the discussion with the employer about their potential major expansion and a request for possible host fee dollars. In these discussions, where they cannot be discussed publicly, there is nothing committed on behalf of the county. It is always said, we will have this discussion if this gets to a certain point, as subject to board approval, but that's where we're at. There's a couple of projects that we just look promising, possible. We just wanted to forecast as maybe having host fee discussions in 19. Both of them are expansion efforts. If I recall, both of them include additional primary jobs. Details are not even that much more clear to me at this time, but there may be an ask forthcoming, subject board approval. Thank you, Mr. Webster. Mrs. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. Just left of the center, Rockford Area Economic Development District, are we obligated to, for the next 2 years, to pay them $100,000 each year?
That is my understanding, that prior to us arriving, that there was a multi-year commitment made to the RADC, and we're in the middle of that multi-year commitment, is my understanding. We can double check that, but that's my understanding. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, because I'd like to see that even brought down to $50,000. I don't see where we have benefited that much from them as far as accounting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gorel. I see a hand up. Carla.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe there initially was a verbal commitment made, but when Julia and Amanda were overseeing the host fees, they actually brought a resolution to have that approved.
So that was approved by the board?
I believe it was, and I'll find that document and send that out.
Thank you very much. We'll confirm that. Thank you, Mrs. Gorel. Any other questions? Mrs. Red.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment on that. The $100,000, I thought it's for grant writing. What have we received from them?
I just want to make sure we're talking about the Rockford Area Economic Development Council, and that is for economic development work by Nathan Bryant, his organization. That is a separate discussion. And we can certainly have a more detailed discussion in Mr. Westcott's Economic Development Committee. Any other discussion, questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Girl.
Thank you, Chairman. In regards to the AAR facility out at the airport, is there any way that we can have our representative from the Airport Authority Board come in and just give us an update on the progress of AAR, exactly how many they've hired, they plan on hiring more? Just kind of, we were told it would be close to 500 jobs. It could be 1,000. I'd just like to see where they're at out there, and if they have received the money from the state and the federal government as part of the deal.
Yeah, that's still in process, but we can absolutely get an update to you.
Because I would just like that story told if those dollars aren't given from the feds and the state, exactly what would happen to the taxpayers and how they would pay for that, the Airport Authority.
Yes, absolutely. There was a funding, a capital stack related federal, state, and then of course a bunch of local entities. So we can get a clarification update on that. I do know that there's discussion, it was mentioned in the paper, I think over the weekend, related to hopeful that in the next year that the state funding could come through for the airport. I do believe the federal, well, let's get a clarification on all the funding that's come in, yet to be paid, and we can also get a status update on employment. I'll go back to Mr. Webster a second time. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, I missed it. Did Mr. Girl ask how many employees are actually working out there yet?
Yes, we're going to get an update on that item.
And then how many planes have they actually done any service work on there? Have they had any of them big planes in that place yet or not? I hear rumors, and I'd like to know how many have they serviced? How many planes came in and came out again?
Thank you. We'll get an update on that. And any other hands up? Yes, Mr. Arena.
To answer the question, some of us got a tour earlier this year, and it was full of planes.
We'll get a status update on that as well. Any other new business, any other unfinished business, Mr. Billick? Excuse me, hold on one second, Mr. Billick. Let's give Mr. Billick the floor, please. Thank you.
I do believe that actually, I think there was an invitation that was sent out. I don't know if it was sent out to absolutely everyone. However, if that is something that might interest you, I think it was actually in regards to that. I would actually invite everyone to kind of come out and check that out.
I believe the invitation at that time in December was for new board members, but certainly I know they'd be happy to extend that to the entire board.
I believe there's another email actually that I received. I'll let you know.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Boomer, second by Mrs. Crosby. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Have a good evening.